So this is probably the most important thing that you have to recognize about making change in your organization, and that is that nobody does change themselves if it's just because I said so. Very few people change because it makes sense. You start getting people to change a little bit if it's their stuff and their personal interest, but even then, so many of us don't do things for our own good. It's not until you get up to the far right-hand corner that people really feel a sense of belonging. Are they willing to change? And I'll explain what that means. Anthropologically, 70,000 years ago, we were all born into tribes. And as a species, we're tribal. We will do a lot to belong. And if you're able to create a sense of belonging, people will gravitate to that. And that's what we taught, in a sense, in Never Eat Alone, that when you go into a sales call, you've got to create an us. I always use the word we with customers, and I mean them, right? I assume their personality. I assume their interests. I assume when I'm walking in there that it's an us from the very beginning, and they feel that. They feel that sense of invitation into a tribe, into a connectedness. Right? The generosity, the intimacy. And that your company has to be the same thing. People will go everywhere if it's a sense of belonging. You know, they'll put on the white sneakers and drink the Kool-Aid, and you as individuals need to create a cult-like attitude among your employees. One of my dear friends and fellow investors in a new company we just started is Tony Hsieh from Zappos. You know, and Tony's an interesting guy. How many of you ever met Tony? Not the most outwardly charismatic guy in the world, is he? Right? But the guy knows how to create tribe. So the power of that, it's not, by the way, most of us who are these outward charismatic people, a lot of us are jackasses. I mean, you know, we're out here like this, covering up for the insecurity and the fear, etc. I mean, it's nothing more. Everybody, if you've got a fear of other individuals, and that's that reptilian brain acting in overdrive, that was actually, some of it could be chemical, but a lot of it was psychological. Whatever happened to you, by what age, by the way? By what age did your relational brain get set in terms of what's safety and what's unsafe? Do you guys know? 3. Yeah. How many of you have children over the age of 3? So the good news is you already screwed them up. Relax. It's all good. But if by the time the kid's 3, their own sense of safety, and I mean, it's kind of interesting, but basically back then you're sort of acting as this little reptilian animal, and everything's about survival. And you're fearing for your life as an animal. Survival is where you're motivated on. You're stumbling around, and anything that would threaten your survival, in your mind you're interpreting lots of stuff, and anything that threatens survival being put out on the stoop, right, is something that you're going to learn how to deal with and acclimate with, and those acclimations and dealing with become your weirdness today that you just hold on to, even though, you know, you don't have to be conflict avoidant anymore. How many, come on, let's be honest for a second. How many people in this room think they've got a bit of a temper? Raise your hands. So that's a very standard thing with entrepreneurs, and I'll tell you something. You know what that is? That's conflict avoidance. I think those of you who have a temper know when I said that, you're like, okay, but let me explain what that means. It's like a teapot. You put a lid on a teapot and you light it up, and lighting it up is the shit that happens in life, right? And life is going to create steam. And if your top's off, steam just evaporates and all's good. No conflict avoidance. You put it on with conflict avoidance, and the steam starts to build. And it's going to come out in one of 2 ways. Either passive aggressiveness, which is as bad as temper, little spurts of passive aggressiveness, or politics, or talking behind people's backs, right? That's the flip side of conflict avoidance. The other one is the top blows. Now, the great thing about the top blowing for those of us who have tempers, or have had tempers, is that it shuts everybody down. And you once again go back to avoiding the conflict. So you couldn't hold it back and boom, and then it shuts everybody down. So the key for most of us as entrepreneurs, probably the biggest thing I can teach all of you all is not just how to build great relationships. Because if you are here and have raised your organizations to a certain level, you've gotten good at doing that, right? But what you might not be good at yet is transparency, is taking the top off and saying what you're feeling, and claiming the voice that you have that says, that disappointed me. And here's what's worth, and this is sort of a weird part of psychology. When you have a temper or when you have a leadership behavior that you're ashamed of, which is any addiction that you have as a leader that doesn't serve you well, right, that you do anyway, usually comes with shame. So when you're ashamed of some element of your leadership trait, like temper or whatever it is, you will let people get away with stuff that only breeds more conflict avoidance and more frustration and anger. So because you're sitting there thinking, oh, I'm not good enough, because most of us as entrepreneurs have some sense of insecurity, or we wouldn't be doing the stupid things that we do, and that insecurity means I'm not good enough. And if you're saying I'm not good enough, then maybe I don't deserve to hold David accountable. Right? Maybe I don't deserve to have that voice. And so what I'll do is I'll sublimate that, and then I'll just be more and more resentful, just breeding that whole cycle. Any of this make sense to everybody? Get a shrink. Seriously, get a shrink. So my shrink at 8:30 in the morning on Saturdays, and I have a session. And we go over kid stuff, spouse stuff, work stuff, personal stuff, right? So those are the things that we go over. And I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but it seems to me perfectly acceptable to expense this. But what's interesting about that, right? It's interesting about that is that then I have him do phone calls with my employees as well on spot checks. So any of my employees it's like $250 an hour or whatever it is. Any of my employees has an open line to my coach, right? And so if at any point I need back channeling information, I can get it if they feel that they need it. And when I'm having a difficulty with a particular employee, I say, you got to check in with Annette this week. You got to check in with so-and-so this week. And then I get beaten up by him, and I get homework of things that I have to do, right, that forces less conflict avoidance, because conflict avoidance is going to kill you. That's why I actually wrote the book, Who's Got Your Back, because I believe that I now have a support group. It happens once a month on Fridays, and it's families. It's multiple couples. 3 couples come together over dinner, one Friday a month. And we follow the 12-step model. We do check-ins. We actually have an element of the dinner where we're allowed to do crosstalk, but there's an element of the dinner that we're not allowed to do crosstalk. And we just do that for each other, and it's both. And then we set goals with each other as to what we're going to do over the next month, and we hold each other accountable. We have some empathy, but we also kick each other's butts, right? So you can create this for yourself. Yeah, did you have a question?
Who coaches the coaches?
Who coaches this group?
No, who coaches the coaches? They're just like everybody else.
Yeah, most of them are crap, right?
So that's why I like groups like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if this group, and this should, spend plenty of time being attentive to each other. Right? Meaning this group is nothing more than a networking group unless you use it for deep engagement. So your job and responsibility, so it's interesting. I mean, and I apologize if this is not the model, but what this group is probably trying to do is trying to fill your time with rich stuff, and therefore they program front of stage stuff, and then they're expecting you to do the networking out there, etc. But look, this stuff isn't as powerful as you sitting with each other deeply and holding each other accountable in small groups. That's powerful. And you need to find your peers here and then go do this afterward. What you should be doing is the dinner before this or something, or the night after, or the calls. Form your group here among peers and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Wouldn't this be fun? Let's have 2 entrepreneurs and 2 sales reps, 2 sales leads. Why don't you have a monthly accountability call, right? And your jobs are to not let each other fail. 2 entrepreneurs, 2 heads of sales, and you could even, I'm just making this up on the fly, but you could even create a thing where the two heads of sales, how about this? How about the entrepreneur and the other person's head of sales get a coaching call every month, right? Which is supposed to actually have a greater degree of transparency than maybe their own salesperson would be willing to have, right? And then so the two entrepreneurs do a call, the two heads of sales do a call, and then they swap. So my entreatise to you is that, like, I have a whole different presentation about building relationships for sales and strategic account management and relationship management, et cetera. The shorthand of that presentation is this. Every goal that you have in your life, as an entrepreneur, put a people plan around it. So here's what I mean by that. How many of you have a to-do list? Yeah. Productivity is important. How many of you have a people plan? So I'll explain what a people plan is for the rest of us. A people plan is just this. When I have a son who's 16, he was 12 when he came into our home, African-American kid. And what he grew up with was a different kind of poor than me. He grew up in the inner city. He was homeless at times, abused, emotionally abused when he was young. Pretty horrible upbringing. I had empathy. No, I had sympathy, but not empathy. I didn't know quite what that was about. So when he came into my home, I built a people plan. I needed to get to know his coach. I needed to get to know his teachers. As much as I disliked the woman I needed to get to know and build a relationship with his social worker, right? I also picked up the phone and called a friend of mine who's an African-American leader in another city that I was in. And I called and I said, hey, introduce me to the African-American leaders in Los Angeles that you have a lot of respect for that came from a similar background to my son. And he gave me a list, and I went and I researched them. And a number of them are like, wow, these are amazing people. And so I picked up the phone, and I started calling them. I'm like, hi, my name's Keith Ferrazzi. You may or may not know me, but I need more black people in my home for dinner. Would you please? And there was this dead silence on the other end of the line. And I'm trying to explain. I'm like, look, here's what I've done. I've adopted a 12-year-old kid who really hates everything. And I don't know how to get through. And I need role models for my boy in life. And I'd like to have a dinner party where I introduce you to some of those people. But I have to tell you very clearly, I'm doing this because I really need your help. And my son, at periods of time, has been thrown out of our home and back into social services and higher levels of care and other things. And during those periods of time, by the way, these people didn't become any less my friends. They remained strong friends. They now remained in my life and at my dinner parties, etc. So the point is that I had a need, which was I needed people in my home that were different than I currently had. I needed new people in my life in order to achieve my goals. And I reached out to them with generosity, but I also reached out to them with authenticity, right? And I built new, real relationships. Just because it's purposeful doesn't mean it's fake. There was nothing fake about the relationships I was building with these individuals, right? They're dear friends of mine, and they always will be. And if you reach out to the world and put a people plan, who are the 5 most important people to any goal you have? I now do dinners at my home just focused on talent recruitment. Like, I used to hire people for jobs. I don't do that. I now have a talent pipeline of people that I want to build relationships with because someday we'll work together. They might not think so, but I do. Right? So put a people plan around talent recruitment that's long enough term and authentic. Put a people plan around revenue generation. That's different, by the way, than a pipeline. Because your pipeline is, it's like, my new book is coming out, Never Eat Alone. We're relaunching it. There's a distinction between connections and relationships. I understand you'll have a pipeline that is much bigger than you'll ever be able to build relationships with. You can be as generous as you can to your pipeline, but you're going to have to double down and create deep relationships within the pipeline. And Nam knows this. You know, in our organization, we have the pipeline, and then we have the ERM list. The pipeline is purely sales. The ERM list is what we call executive relationship management. And the ERM list is prioritized A, B, and C. And sometimes if somebody comes into our pipeline, I decide that that's a relationship I'm going to double down on, they get an ERM designation. right? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's because of whatever reason or another, I don't have time, or this is not the right individual, doesn't go in my ERM list. But the ERM list is the relationships that you work. And the reason you go A, B, and C in the ERM list is because you don't have enough time to double down and have one-on-one dinners with everybody. So last night, my one-on-one dinner was with an A-level ERM list candidate, because this is an individual who will be one of the largest CEOs in the world when he gets his job. Right now, he's Chief Operating Officer and President of one of the largest companies in the world, and he's an extraordinary guy, and I liked him a lot. And we were talking as much about family and other things, and so he's an ERMA. The ERM list is really important for you. And your strategic account management work needs to really be as much relationship management work. You need to have the most critical relationships at a customer mapped out, but then you got to manage it with intimacy and connectivity over a long period of time. It's not an episodic thing. Your account plans, which is why account planning is something that you do once a year. Relationship management, depending upon the priority, is something you do every month. The first thing I would do is go back to the original point, which is they have to feel it's their business. If you believe strongly that that's the right answer, it's because you've done the calculus in your mind that's come to the conclusion based on the fact of however you're motivated. If your people aren't sufficiently motivated the same way you are, and they don't own the business the same way you do, and what I would argue is it's not just about compensation structures, it's about emotion. If you have not gotten your people to own the future of the business as you do, that's your fault. And yes, if you underpay people, I agree. If you don't have the right kind of compensation mix, fine. But I have been able to do so much more through celebration, positive emotional reward, giving the decisions over to them, making them come to the same calculus that you have, through their own motivations and their own desires and their own celebration, and pumping them up. Like, I started sending my lieutenants, I started sending them to executive committee dinners without me. Said, you guys have to learn to have each other's backs. I stopped letting them talk about each other behind each other's backs to me. I said, no, damn it, stop it. If you are not a team bonded to each other, we're never going to be successful. I don't want to hear it. Go fix it with them. Either go fix it with them or you got to leave, because you have to figure out how to run this organization as a team and bond together as a team. And we constantly allow ourselves, through our own insecurity and our own habitual practices, we allow ourselves to be a hub and spoke to your organization. Everybody comes to you, and it's you and to the rest of the individuals, and you're not creating a them, you're creating a bunch of individuals reporting up to you. That's got to stop, because they've got to be the entrepreneur. Now, they may not have, as individuals, they don't have what you have, but collectively they do. And if they work together as a who's got your back team, and they're comfortable with transparency, and they care about each other's success, and they know you care about them, and they bound out of bed with more of a spring in the step, collectively they are you. And that's how an organization goes from an entrepreneur that's tethered to you, and it will die when you die as a company, to an institution that thrives and grows. I do believe that, well, let me come back here. If you are the kind of person that people would rather be around, right, then that's a differentiation. Probably not enough to really allow you to grow your business. That middle piece, the professional currency. Look, your product has to be so damn generous. You have to sweat like hell to make your product extraordinary to consumers, whether that's B2B or B2C. And whether that's a company like Uber that comes along and just has such a better product, right? And they've really invested in the elegance of breaking through that, cracking the code of that delivery. That has nothing to do with, quote, relationships, but it does. The proxy is the relationship and the service to the consumer. And many of us in this room are still pushing sales instead of trying to serve deeply. And if you don't get stomach aches when you're worried about whether or not you're adding extraordinary value, then that's going to put you out of business. You might just be a good salesman and be able to hang on and sell shit. And that'll be fine for now. But if you don't worry about adding such extraordinary value that people can't go somewhere else, right? That's how you have to sweat differentiation. Now, once you do that, and your product really is that level of extraordinary value, and you focus that much on it, then you have to even go one step further, which is this piece, which is to say anybody who's in a buying authority, you've got to serve them in some area around this, not just because your product's better. You've got to help their kids get internships, right? You've got to introduce their spouses to charities to make sure that they're happy when they move to a new city. You've got to give them the book that you think will be powerful to them. You've got to take them and introduce them to some spiritual thing because you just think that they're not grounded because you care that much about them. It's that kind of wacky stuff that you've got to be what my therapist is to me, you've got to be to them. And you've got to think about that. Even if your product is a consumer product, you've got to think about what you're really adding the value of. And that's your job. Your job is to get into the heads of people and figure out what you're really serving. You're serving an emotional connection. You're serving a promise. You're serving a hope. You're serving an aspiration. Otherwise, there'd be no financial services firms. It's just commodities, right? What do you serve? And that requires a level of commitment to a human being that gives a damn. If you're a transactional jackass that's trying to get more money out of people's pockets instead of truly converting yourself to serve them, which is I've always cared so deeply about serving my customers that I would do anything to serve them. Now, what I had to realize a number of years ago is I had to have that same commitment to my people. If you don't have that same level of commitment to service in all elements of a person's life and humanity and care that deeply about them as your own employees, you're just wasting, you're burning $100 bills.